I think it's quite significant in any talks and mediations moving forward are quite significant because we already see the framework of the MOU being under threat as there have been continuous violations on the MOU, starting with the violations on point number 1 pertaining to Lebanon. There have been violations which pertain to threats made against Iran. Clearly, threats are mentioned in the MOU that any country making threats on the sovereignty or integrity of the other country, of the opposing country, is in violation of the MOU. And I think any talks serve as a stepping stone to reach again the track of the MOU, the roadmap of the MOU. However, the fact that the talks are not direct is a clear indication of perhaps a better position from the Iranian side, as there were claims that the Iranians had requested for these Doha meetings. The Iranians clearly pointed out that they were not the party that requested for the Doha meetings. And quite recently, Iranians have snubbed talking directly to Witkoff and Kushner, which is also an indication that Iran wants to maintain control of its position and the parameters of the MOU.
And Iran insists the United States must first fulfill its commitments before any final or direct negotiations. So how really realistic do you think is that position from a diplomatic standpoint?
I think Iran sees three facts on the table. One, it was not the violating party initially by launching this war of aggression against Iran. The Americans were the aggressive party. They acted illegally against international law, pursuing diplomacy before it was met with aggression from the Americans and the Israelis, with the aiding and abetting of several GCC countries by letting the Americans use their bases to launch war crimes, basically, against Iran. Iranian civil infrastructure was hit, Iranian schools were hit, Iranian hospitals were hit, several innocent lives were lost. And the MOU indicated, it was a clear indication by many analysts, not only myself, many analysts across the world, including the Israeli population, 92% of which think Iran has won the war. And this was a strategic defeat for the Americans and the Israelis. And anyone who wanted to support this war of aggression, whether if they didn't want to support it rhetorically, like the GCC countries, they did support them with infrastructure and using their soil. So I don't think Iran wants the other party to dictate terms. Iran doesn't need to provide concessions to the Americans. The negotiation and diplomacy will succeed and be a realistic achievement if all parties abide by the MOU. And I think Pakistan can play a key role in having these parties abide by the MOU, as Pakistan orchestrated and mediated this MOU. So drifting away from the MOU is a disrespect to Iran, to negotiations, to Pakistan, and the parties involved, including Qatar. The Americans need to, for once, perhaps respect their signatures, stop violating the terms of the MOU, for there to be hope for diplomacy to succeed.
And the Strait of Hormuz remains a major point of disagreements, so particularly over Iran proposed shipping charges. So how would this dispute, do you think, affect regional stability and global energy markets?
I think we've already seen how it's affected global energy markets. The strategic oil reserves of the world have run out, including American strategic oil reserves. The Americans have been trying to manipulate the markets with speculation, with putting money and playing in the derivatives market, with buying and selling short. But the world sees these lies and this manipulation, and it's like the Titanic hitting an iceberg. The more the Strait of Hormuz is entangled in conflict, the more dangerous it will be for the global economy, including the American economy. And no one else is to blame but the people who caused this conflict in the region. But regarding the Strait of Hormuz itself, there are certain facts on the table that Iran sees. One, Iran was met with aggression through these waterways of the Strait of Hormuz, of the Persian Gulf, of the Gulf of Oman. Again, as I mentioned, through GCC-based bases in the region. That's why in point number 5, Iran has stipulated that it will be talking with Oman mainly. It did not clearly and particularly separate other GCC countries in point number 5. It did mention other Persian Gulf nations also being involved in these talks. But since Iran was met with aggression, Iran first and foremost takes the safety of its population, of its respects the blood of its martyrs, and it's a matter of national security and safety that it is not met with aggression again through these waterways. Now, these waterways complement Iran's jurisdiction and proximity in the region. They're complemented by maritime law. So Iran is also legally justified to perhaps charge for dredging, charge for environmental fees, and also make sure that the safety and security of its borders, of its geographical integrity, of its sovereignty are respected. Iran is not a capitalist slave state. Perhaps the oil markets are important for Iran. It is also a matter of national security. But first and foremost, Iran has to make sure that is not again met with a war of an illegal war of aggression where its leader was assassinated, innocent people were assassinated and killed. So I think these two facts complement each other. Iran's rights as per maritime law, plus Iran's need to maintain security so the war is not repeated. And if it is repeated, Iran needs to be ready and have the finger on the trigger as a matter of national security once again.
And nuclear negotiations are yet to begin despite June agreement. So what are the main obstacles, do you think, to those talks moving forward?
Sure. I don't think the nuclear issue is a sticking point. I think the Americans know it, the regional players know it. There was a recent announcement by Bahrain trying to insinuate that Iranians were pursuing non-peaceful nuclear means and a nuclear weapon, where Iran just said, let's create a nuclear-free zone where nobody has nuclear weapons. Let's put our money where our mouth is, and actually called for non-proliferation. Iran's doctrine, its fatwa against nuclear weapons was clear. Tulsi Gabbard and 18 other intelligence agencies, as quoted by Joe Kent, the anti-terrorism chief that resigned from the Trump administration, said that Iran was far away from nuclear weapons. Iran did not pose an imminent threat to American interests or America. Therefore, even the Americans know the nuclear issue is not a sticking point. Of course, it's important, but Iran was abiding by its nuclear obligations as per the JCPOA that was ripped up ironically by the same president that attacked them illegally. I don't think the nuclear issue is going to be a sticking point. The geo-economic reality that the Strait of Hormuz has caused is going to be the main issue, the main trigger point. Iran has realized this. The Americans are trying to perhaps buy time using their same tactic of sending Kushner and Witkoff, and Iran understands this playbook. It will not perhaps let the previous tactics be used by the Americans and let this drag on. Iran has two buttons that it can use legally. One is the Strait of Hormuz, and it can, in collaboration with its independent and sovereign partners, meaning the Yemenis in Bab el-Mandab, also use its leverage in the Bab el-Mandab. I think these are the geo-economic dangers are much more of the sticking points and the points that the world needs to solve, especially the Americans, because the world will be pointing their fingers of blame at the Americans for causing this economic catastrophe and this global energy catastrophe. by themselves and the Israelis by instigating this war of aggression, this illegal war of aggression against Iran.
And Ali, looking ahead, do you believe that both sides can actually keep this agreement on track? And so is there a growing risk of another, do you think, diplomatic tensions?
I think they could if the Americans and Israelis don't want to again bite off more than they can chew. They don't want to miscalculate and drag the world to potential economic Armageddon, depression, and recession. If those mistakes are not made again, and they realize that the geo-economic pressure on the world, on their own economies even, is disastrous. They need to take diplomacy into their hands. They need to have accountability. I think the Americans and Israelis have been shocked. Even their GCC partners who wanted to collaborate with them have also woken up that the days of trying to bully the region, trying to take control of sovereign states or countries' energy reserves and manipulate the financial markets, bully the countries with the US dollar, people will have to detach from these American tactics moving forward. If the Americans don't fix their ways, I think, yes, there will be room for diplomacy moving forward if people adhere to the MOU that has provided a framework for that. When you go and sign side agreements with the Lebanese government against their constitution and betray the MOU that you have signed with Iran just a week earlier, these are steps that are mischievous and allow for diplomacy to collapse. If America reins the Israelis in order to conform to point number 1 of the MOU, which pertains to Lebanon as well, if the Americans abide by international law, if the Americans stop trying to have excessive demands, if they act accordingly, then I think there is room for diplomacy and Iran will embrace it. But by taking these tactics forward, it's only going to give an excuse to Iranian hardliners who in this country are telling the people who are pursuing diplomacy, I told you so. I told you not to trust the American signature. I told you not to pursue diplomacy with Americans. Their signature is not to be trusted. We were met again with war. We were met with the ripped up JCPOA, and this cycle is going to repeat itself. So if they want to give diplomacy a chance, not give an excuse to hardliners across both aisles, then they need to act more responsibly and less irrationally and move diplomacy forward.